this is our first episode, and it feels like
years.
Yeah, I guess it's been almost a year, but this is our season 2 kickoff episode. So thanks for joining. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Jeremy Noble on. I came across Jeremy on LinkedIn. He was doing actually, this was before you started this cognitive bias series, but I don't remember exactly how I connected with you, but one of our best friends, Kevin Burke, I mentioned your name because you were going to be our guest for this episode. And he's like, are you kidding me? And you guys know each other too. It's such a tiny little world. He said you guys went out to dinner not too long ago. And I was like, that's just nuts, how small of a world it is. So if you would, take us down kind of your background and give us a little introduction to who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Actually from Satsuma, Alabama, but nobody knows where Satsuma is. But it's in Mobile County. It's funny. So it was actually named, for the Satsuma fruit. There was a bunch of Satsuma trees in the town at one time, and then this pest came in and just wiped them all out. The citrus canker, is the name of the pest, and it just wiped them all out. So I actually never saw a Satsuma until I was an adult, despite being from there. But so come from Satsuma. I got my PhD in counseling psychology from Southern Miss, and from there joined the Army and immediately went into kind of a clinical role in the Army. So my first year, my internship was diagnosing and treating mental disorders, and also consulting with commanders. And I did a postdoc at Fort Bragg. So it was called the Clinical and Operational Psychology Residency. And that's where I learned what operational psychology was. And so really what that is just applying psychology to the special operations community to help improve their performance. And so that's what Kevin does, your buddy Kevin. And so when I finished that residency, I went to the 75th Ranger Regiment down at Fort Benning, Georgia. And I was there as their operational psychologist for almost 6 years. Wow. Best job I've ever had, in my life. Probably the best one I'm ever going to have. Just an incredible organization, incredible people. And so I was at Ranger Regiment till about 2021. And then I went up to a unit in the DC area, was there for about a year and a half, decided to leave the Army. I didn't quite have 10 years in. So I was kind of at that point where, do I stay in for the full 20 or do I pivot and go do something else? So I decided to get out. I started my own consulting business and that's what I do right now. So I consult for businesses. I pretty much do the same thing I did within the special operations community. So I apply psychology to help businesses perform better. So that's things like helping them hire the right people, helping them with any kind of like retention problems or climate issues. I'll do like executive coaching with folks. I like doing like team development. And so like doing personality tests with teams and then having them sort of discuss and talk through each other's personalities. That's really fun. Because you always have somebody that's like, no, that's not like me. And everybody jumps in and says, no, that's exactly
that's you, buddy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great self-awareness builder. And then other half of my time, so half of my time I do that. The other half of my time, I still do government contract work. So I still get to go and work for some of these units and primarily doing like personnel selection. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Man, that is so cool. Kevin was telling me that you were an Army Ranger as a psychologist. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
So that's got to be very uncommon, right?
Yeah. So our lineage, there's only a handful of us. So I think I was the fourth command psychologist there, and there's been 2 since me.
Wow.
So yeah, it's an interesting experience going through Ranger School, especially as a psychologist.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
I shouldn't have passed. There were many moments where I was just like, man, what am I doing here? And I had moments where I skirted by the skin of my teeth. Like, I'll give you an example. The first week at Ranger School, you have to do your critical events. So you have to do your PT test. You have to do, and part of it is a 12-mile road march. And, the road march, you've got 35 pounds on your back dry, plus helmet, rifle, plus your camelback full of water. And so it's roughly around 50 pounds. And then you have to finish the 12 miles in less than 3 hours. And and I was fine doing it like training and all this stuff. I had to do it to get into Ranger Regiment, and I was good. I actually rucked pretty well. But what they don't tell you, or at least I didn't know, is that the night before they're smoking you until like 2 a.m. So like you're doing duck walks with with your rucksack over your head. So you get up at like 4. So you basically have no sleep going into it, and you're depleted, and so you're cramping the whole time. And then the route is after you hit about, I'd say 4 miles, all of a sudden you start hitting gravel, like rolling hills and gravel. And so when I hit it's an out and back course. When I hit the turnaround point, I was on track. I was going to make it. But I was like, every mile I was seeing that I was losing pace. And so I got to maybe mile 9, and I was like right on the line. Like if I slow down anymore, I'm not going to make it. And, we're down in Columbus, Georgia, and it was like late spring. And so a lot of thunderstorms roll through, and thunder starts, lightning starts popping. And so we get a notification that they need to put us on what they call lightning lockdown. And so we go to like a checkpoint, and we just kind of bed down and wait for the storm to pass. And so the checkpoint was like, I don't know, like half a mile or quarter mile, like towards the finish line. And so I go to the checkpoint, and I just kind of hunkered down under a poncho. And I mean, it was probably half an hour to an hour where we just kind of sat there. So I was able to rest.
Yeah.
And then when we started back, they, the time that they originally called it, that was where they started the clock again. And so I came in at like 2 hours and 58 minutes. And so like, I would not have passed if it had not been for that thunderstorm.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a ton of stories like that. I'll share one with you. I haven't told many people. So, in that first week, you also do, there's a couple of obstacle courses, and there's this one obstacle course called Malvesti. And, the way it starts is you're paired up with a Ranger buddy, and you have to run. And I forget how long the run is, but you have to stay with your buddy, and you run to the start of the obstacle course. And then, I mean, there's tons of guys in the course. And so there's a line before you can actually start the course. And so my buddy was pretty slow. And so we were in the back of the line. And so they made us do like squats and duck walks, and they're spraying us with a water hose while we're waiting in line. And so I finally start the obstacle course. I get to a rope obstacle. And the cadre says something, and I didn't hear what he said in terms of instructions. And so I climb up the rope. And then when I come back down, there's like a pad underneath, and I kind of step on the pad, and I get off. And the cadre says, "You're a no-go for this event." He said, "My instructions were climb the rope, and when you come down, don't touch the pad with your feet." Uh-huh. And I didn't hear it. He said, "Well, you can try again." And so I tried again, and at that point, my grip was just gone, and I couldn't get up the rope. And so if you can't do an obstacle, you get a minor minus. You get enough minor minuses, it turns into a major minus. Enough major minuses means you have to recycle, or you fail kind of the iteration. So I've already got a minor minus. I go to the next obstacle, which is monkey bars over this like pool of water. And the monkey bars are like, they're not stationary. They roll. They're wet from people who have gotten up there before. And the instructor says, navigate this obstacle without touching the vertical kind of beams. And then there's like sandbags at the beginning. And I say, okay, so I hop on it. I get halfway across, my grip gives, and I fall in the water. Yeah. And so I go back to the beginning, and he says, you have another attempt. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to get across with my grip the way that it is right now. And I think, what was his instructions? All right, navigate the obstacle without touching the vertical beams of the sandbags. Okay, so I hop up, and I put my legs through, and I actually get on top of the monkey bars. And so like, I'm on my stomach, and I'm like pulling myself across the top, and nobody's saying anything. And so I'm like, all right, this is going to work, Well, I think I like disappeared for a minute because I think they just didn't see me. And I get about halfway across, and I hear somebody from like the other side of the obstacle course just screaming. And it's one of the instructors, and he comes up and he's like, "Ranger, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Get down." And so I get down, and I said, "Sergeant," I said, you told me to navigate the obstacle by your instructions, and my grip is shot. This is the only way I can do it and still do it in line with your directions." And he sat there and he was like, "Just go." And he let me go. Like, man, you talk about a morale booster. Like I was so proud of myself, and because I didn't get a major minus or minor minus or anything. That was like one of the few wins.
That's awesome, man. Yeah.
We could have gone a completely different direction. If he would have been like, "Nope, you're a no-go for this event, or this is a safety violation," and could have dropped me from the course.
I bet they changed the directions after you went.
I'm sure they did.
That's awesome, man. It's such a cool story because you went in knowing you went in as a psychologist, right? So you weren't already a ranger and then you decided to go psych. You went in with that goal in mind. That's a rare breed of people that would want to do mental health and ranger school.
Right. Like knowing what you know and then putting yourself in that situation sounds conflicting.
I was pretty ignorant going into it, honestly. So when I was a resident, one of the first ranger psychologists, he was a faculty member of mine. We had case presentations we had to do. So there was one at the beginning of the year to kind of establish a baseline of our assessment skills, and then we'd do one at the end of the year to see how far we've developed. The one at the beginning of the year, afterwards he pulled me aside and he said, he's like, first he said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And he said, "I think you'd make a good ranger psych." And I said, "What is that? What is a ranger psych?" And so he told me a little bit about it. And I've always been somebody with like a high need for stimulation. And so it sounded really exciting. And he connected me with the Ranger Regiment psychologist. That individual came out, interviewed me. And then I had to go to what's called RASP, so Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. So I had to go to a 3-week course where they assess you and see if they want to hire you in the organization. So there's all the PT test stuff that I mentioned before. There is psychological testing, which is what I eventually was the one doing,
that's
folks. Cool. Which is interesting, being a psych and getting assessed by another psychologist. And then there's a board that at the end where you're sitting there in front of 4 senior leaders in the organization and they grill you. I was not worried about the board because, as a psychologist, like I can talk, like that's what we do for a living, right? And I remember the other candidates were super nervous about the board. And it's all like, it's anybody that comes in that organization goes through the same process, which is one of the things that I think makes it great. And so these are all infantry guys. These are also some current Rangers that are assessing for leadership positions. And I remember them just being so nervous about the board. And I just remember thinking, I'm not really that worried about it. And then I get in the board and I make the mistake of when somebody asked me a question, I said, "That's a great question, sir." And the board president stopped me and said, "Hey," he points at me. He said, "We don't need your validation on what's a good question or not." He said, "Don't forget you're in a formal board and you need to act as such." And then later, and I'm sure you hear me saying and a lot. I'm not the most fluent of speakers. And he stops me like later on and says, I was a captain at the time. He said, "Captain Noble," he said, "You've said 13 times in this presentation or in this board." He said, "If you say one more time, I'm kicking you out of here." And so then I've got pressure. Yeah. And I know I said again, but he didn't kick me out.
Wow. Yeah. That's
stressful.
That's so cool. For people listening and honestly, the general psychology community, I feel like operational psychology is not really understood or known what it actually is. Even in my experience in my cohort in school, when people ask me what I want to do and I talk about this, they have like no clue that this even is a sect and a discipline within the field of psych. So kind of explaining what that is, would you mind just giving like an overview of what operational psychology is and kind of what you guys do in the field?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it is applying psychology to improve the performance in the name of national security. So those are to improve the performance of individuals, organizations that really fall in the national security kind of realm. So you have intelligence community agencies, you've got Department of Defense, people like that. I put it under the umbrella of consultation, because when you look at the definition of consultation, you have one subject matter expert that is using his or her expertise to try to impart knowledge on somebody else or some other kind of body. And so really what we're doing is we're trying to take what we've learned in school and through our training and apply that to help these individuals become better. And so it falls into a couple different categories or subsets. So you have assessment and selection is probably what operational psychologists spend most of their time on, at least in the DoD. Like Ranger Regiment, for example, like I said, everybody that comes into the organization goes through a psychological assessment to determine if they're suitable for the organization. And that can include like job analyses, where an organization, they know they want to hire the right people, but they don't exactly know what to look for. And so we would go in and sit and do kind of a formal analysis to say, what are the necessary attributes upon entry into this organization that you care about? And then we would assess for those specific attributes and then communicate that information to the hiring authorities so they can make well-informed decisions about their people. So assessment selection is one piece. There's individual performance enhancement. So that could be in the vein of like what you would think sports psychology would be. That could also be like individual coaching. So maybe somebody has goals. Like I've worked with people who they're transitioning out of the military and they want to figure out what career that they're going to do in their next life. There's like team building, team development stuff, which is probably my favorite thing to do. With the military, you can get away with doing things a little more than you can in the civilian world. Like in the civilian world, you have like the Americans with Disability Act, where you can't actually ask certain questions in the assessment selection process. And the military, that, is not necessarily the case. And so we've been able to be a little more loose and fast with like some of our interventions with soldiers. And one of those things, what I'm alluding to is, when doing like team personality tests, I will put everybody's scores up for everyone to see. Now I get their permission and they're all for it, but I'll put like personality scores and I'll kind of label who it is on the team. And that way, man, you talk about fruitful discussion. I've scheduled these things for like 2 hours and we hit the 2 hour mark and we're not even halfway through. And the guys are like, let's keep going. And so we do it for 3 hours or more, There is program improvement research that's part of operational psychology. So if you're running a program, you need to validate it. We have done that at Ranger Regiment, where we reach out to leaders and we say, hey, of all the people that we've hired in the last year, tell me if given the opportunity again, would you hire this person again or not? And so once we collect data there and we determine who are the failures and who are the successes, then we can look at our psychological measures and see like what are some of the predictors of the top performers here, and what are some of the predictors of the ones that are failing out. So those are kind of the main areas. There's some other pieces that I shouldn't go into, just because of like they're more of like a classified kind of nature, not because they're anything like shady or anything like that, but because they could put people's lives in danger if I kind of speak to them. But really the thing to know with what I'm talking about here is that we're still applying psychology to help our warfighter improve their performance. Whatever that job may be, we'll serve as a consultant to bring our expertise in and just provide another view, another lens to help them, with their jobs.
I can see where the confusion though comes with muddying the Op Psych scope of work and mission and the IO Psych, like in the private sector. Because if you drop the national security component, there's a lot of similarities there, right? From a consultation perspective.
So I think at least in the military, the big difference is all operational psychologists are licensed either clinical or counseling psychologists. And so like when I was at Ranger Regiment, 95% of my work was more IO psychology. But if there was a mental health crisis, then I had that skill set. And really, when the commander of the unit, like if there is a legitimate mental health crisis and the commander needs to lean on their command psychologist, like you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to jump in and help out. So like I'll give you an example. I was driving home from work one day, and I get a call, and I'm told that we had a ranger at a apartment complex who had kind of barricaded himself in his room and had a gun to his head. Mm-hmm. And so I get a call, hey, what do we do? And so of course, like I've got to go respond to that. Whereas I think an IO psychologist is not going to have that clinical background to kind of know how to advise command. So, yeah, that was a wild scenario. It actually turned into a 3-day standoff with the individual. Geez. So I get there, and our unit sergeant major got there at the same time. And we both get out of our cars and we're walking to where the complex is, and police have it roped off. We get to the police rope, and he looks at me and he says, "Well, I hope we don't get shot." And we go under the tape, and there was a police officer in the parking lot with a rifle. And when he saw us, he whipped around and pointed the rifle at us. And my sergeant major was like, "Whoa, I'm the sergeant major. This is my psych. We're here to help." We get there. The ranger was in his apartment, and there were local police lined up in the corridor, ready to go in. And I remember looking, and I don't want this to sound like I'm criticizing the local police. I thought they did a great job. But I remember looking at one of the officers, and he's super young. I remember him, he had a shotgun. I remember seeing him trembling. And for me, it was like, holy cow, this is not a good situation. Fortunately, my sergeant major was awesome. He came up, we started talking to the police, and we kind of worked out a game plan, and the police stood down. And what happened was the ranger actually wanted to die by a cop. He wanted them to come in. He was actually sitting on a couch with 2 pistols, waiting for them to come, like facing the door, waiting for them to come in. And he was just going to point the pistol at them, and they were going to shoot him. He was also intoxicated. So the police ended up leaving. We were there until, like, we were on the phone with him. We were there until we thought he passed out, went to sleep. We staged some rangers there in the parking lot to make sure that, just to watch, and then we're going to come back the next day. And the thought is, he's sober, we'll get him to the hospital. We didn't know he had more alcohol in the room. And so he woke up the next day, started drinking again. So me, my sergeant major, and then one of our deputy commanders the next day we were under his balcony talking to him, and he had a pistol under his armpit. He had one in his waistband, and he's still drunk, and we're talking to him. And so long story short, I noticed some things with him, and I don't want to give too many details out of respect for the individual, but I noticed some things that made me think that there was a potential personality disorder going on here. And I'll tell you, the thing that I noticed was when we would pull back, I would notice him kind of step out on his balcony and sort of look and be like, "Hey, where'd they go?" Like he was thriving on the attention. Yeah. And I found out a whole bunch of other things that sort of confirmed my thought. And so what I advised command was, I think we need to freeze him out. I think we need to withdraw attention, and we're communicating with him via text and phone, and say, "Hey, we're here when you need us, when you're ready for us." And I mean, it was a risky call, but didn't know what else to do. Yeah. And it worked. The next morning, he texted the sergeant major and said, "Hey, I'm ready." And they went and picked him up, and then I met him at the hospital, and we had him hospitalized. So that's a kind of a long-winded example of you can do all the consulting and performance enhancing stuff all day long, but if when a crisis happens and command needs you and you can't help them, then I don't know how much you're worth. And that might be a harsh thing to say, but so I think that's really the differentiator, at least in the DoD. I know in some other like non-military units it may be different, but yeah.
No, that's really interesting, and it definitely makes a a unique skill set that you bring to the table of being able to provide that assessment and consultation, but also no one else is going to be able to step in and fill that type of role as a clinician as well. That's why it's such a cool aspect of psych and discipline that I feel like it's definitely growing and people are starting to understand a little bit more now, but it's not one of the mainstream ones.
And like you said, there's so few people that have the like clinical experience and the actual military experience.
Training,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you come with like it's a unique background that I imagine is respected by everyone that you work with, that you have both experiences.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I was fortunate to be a part of a unit like the Ranger Regiment. I never felt like in the out group. And I felt like that other places, but in Ranger Regiment, everybody goes through the same selection. Everybody wears a tan beret. Everybody has a scroll in their sleeve. Everyone's expected to go to Ranger school. And so like I've had many moments to where like a Ranger hit me up and said, "Hey, sir, I'm worried about this guy." And then we were able to get the guy treatment because the
so
barriers that would have been there, were not. There's like this. I guess the best way I can describe it is like I've had a mentor say that when you have a Ranger tab, a Ranger tab, you go to Ranger school, you get your tab. If you have a Ranger tab, that people assume you're a good leader unless proven otherwise. And I think that the same thing applies for like being in regiment, wearing a tan beret. I think there's automatic trust and buy-in unless you prove them otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes that position so effective is that we're part of the same tribe, and there was not that whole like I'm the psych, I'm here to help you, and I'm not really like understanding what the guys are going through because I also hallucinated in Ranger school.
What really makes that such a unique role within the field of psychology is your client isn't necessarily like the guy that you're talking to talk through like a tough situation. Ultimately, are you still your client the government? Is your client the army or the intel agency that you're working for? Like, how does that relationship kind of work with massaging what you have to disclose and what you don't have to disclose from a trust perspective with the guys?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is that your client is almost always the command and the army. But there's nuance there. Like when you're doing personnel selection, it is absolutely the command. And in our informed consent, when we do interviews with the candidates, like we make that clear at the beginning of like I just did a few yesterday, and like I tell every single one that, hey, like this is a job suitability assessment. My whole purpose here is to collect data from you and then turn around and give it to command so they can make a well-informed decision. And so there's nothing confidential. Now, if something comes up in that interview that's like really personal and private, but is not relevant to the assessment, like I'm not going to share that with the board. But afterwards, at least at Ranger Regiment, if they're hired, we will sit down with them afterwards and we'll go through like we have the NEO that we give them, personality test. We'll go through the results. And at that point, the client has shifted to them. At that point, and I tell them that I say, before I was assessing you before you were in the gate. Well, now you're in the gate. Now you're part of the unit. Now my job is to help you improve your performance. And so like this information doesn't go anywhere else. This is purely for you. And so like they are my client at that point, but my purpose is still to improve their performance so it would improve the organizational performance. And so it's still, my client really is still the unit.
Yeah.
The clinical part is a little difficult because your client that you're seeing for therapy they are the client. But at any point, if it's determined that their condition no longer meets medical retention standards, like if they're no longer fit for duty, then it would be my responsibility to drop that, permanent profile, meaning they need to, like, we're dropping a med board. And so at that point, that's my like the Army is my client, because I've determined that if this person stays in, that it's not, they're not fit, like they're not fit for duty, that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to stay in. And I can give you examples. So at Ranger Regiment, we have a couple of different assessment and selection programs. The one that I spend most of my time on, and the one I'm really describing here, is RASP-2. So that's our Ranger Assessment and Selection Program for officers and senior enlisted. So these are leaders in the organization. We have RASP-1, which is for junior enlisted. So it's more of like a screen out kind of process. There's big numbers. There's like 160 guys that go through per month, whereas the officer and senior enlisted one is more like 30 guys every class. So you guys know that when you get a bunch of mostly males between 18 and 25, like that's the prime range. If you're going to have a psychotic break, it's going to be for men, usually during that age range. And so if we're sending through 1,600 young men through this stressful course every year, it's only a matter of time before we get somebody who has a break. And I saw a few of those when I was there. There's one in particular that stands out for me who he started having auditory hallucinations and thought that the voices were the cadre telling him that he needed to go like clear rooms. Like he was like doing like room clearing procedures in abandoned buildings on base, and then at one point disappeared for a couple of days. So he went AWOL, but he thought he was in like a training exercise. And so we got him back, and he was hospitalized. And when he got in the hospital, his symptoms actually resolved. And so when I saw him, he was just confused. He was just like, why? I don't know why I was doing that. And so per Army regulations, he was actually still fit for duty. Like he was actually fit to continue serving in the Army unless he had another episode in the next 12 months. And so per the Army, which, is one of my clients in that scenario, he's still good to stay in. But then per the Ranger Regiment, where at that time we were steadily deployed to Afghanistan, he's an infantry guy. If he stays in Ranger Regiment, he's going to combat. Like it's going to happen in probably the next year. Yeah. And so for me, with the unit being my client, there's absolutely no way this guy can stay in this unit, because like what's going to happen if he's out on target and all of a sudden he hears voices and he thinks that the guy next to me is the Taliban. So we got him in a like a warrior transition battalion. So it's a battalion that exists for people with injuries that are kind of working to get back to the fight. And but I don't know what happened to him after that. But that was an example of where the unit was really more my client, even though I was seeing this guy in more of like a clinical sort of vein.
So you guys play this kind of hybrid role where ultimately your client is the command when you have to make these decisions on who's going to be a high performer and who's going to do well by the unit. But then once a person gets in, you then kind of play this role of you're there to make sure they succeed, within the unit, but you also have an obligation. If it falls below a certain standard, you still report back to the command. So it's kind of this very delicate balance and juggling act, it sounds like.
It absolutely is. I mean, to me, that's probably the hardest part of that position. And that applies to any psychologist that's in the military. Like pure clinical. And law, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, their mission is to take care of these, officers or these soldiers. And, but when it reaches a point where it's like, oh man, like I don't think like everything that I throw at this individual, everything we work through is not working. And I think at this point it's time to medically separate them. In a perfect world, that's a collaborative conversation with that individual. And I'd like to think it happens like that more times than not. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult because we're human, right? We're biased. If we're working with a client and we really like them and they don't want to be medically separated from the Army, and we think that they probably should, then we're sort of biased towards like, let's let's push it a little bit longer. Let's see if we can, work out something. And so, yeah, I think that's probably one of the more challenging pieces of that role.
In terms of like, I don't know if there is this, but in terms of confidentiality, or like when you break confidentiality for, outside of the military, you've got these strict, like, here's when we do something different and we bring other people in. Is there any of that in your role?
Yeah, there is. So all the limits to confidentiality are the same as the civilian world. So if somebody is a threat to themselves, like an imminent threat, for suicide, if they're a threat to other folks, if there's any kind of abuse of a vulnerable individual, child or adult, there are a couple of added limits to confidentiality in the military. One of those is any sort of domestic violence. So the military has a family advocacy program, or the Army does at least. I can't speak for the other branches. I'm sure they have a similar process. But so if an individual in therapy reports that they have hit their spouse or whatever, then that's a referral to this family advocacy program, and it's something where the commander is gonna get involved, and they're just gonna make sure that spouse is protected, and this individual gets the treatment to try to prevent that from happening again in the future. So that's one piece, and then the other one is substances. If there's any sort of substance use reported, then or if there's problematic alcohol use, then there's a substance use disorder clinic that the person has to be referred to, and it's something where command gets involved too. So those can get tricky, as you might imagine. You have an individual that comes in and they open up to you and they trust you, and then they admit that maybe they hit their kid a little too hard or something like that, and then you have an added responsibility where you have to act on that, or you have to call the representatives of family advocacy and consult with them and say, hey, like, is this something I need to report? So I think the way that I've navigated that is I've been crystal clear in my informed consent of like, hey, here are the things, like, if you tell me these things, then I have to report those.
Yeah,
that's good. Do you refer people to like outside mental health resources so that they're not using you as their personal therapist, to give you a little bit more cushion and leeway with what that relationship looks like?
Yeah. So I managed a clinic when, like, we had our own behavioral health clinic within our footprint. So as the operational psychologist, I tried not to carry a caseload because I was gone like 60% of the time. So it was irresponsible for me to carry a caseload. But also it helps with the separation too. Army commanders have this tool called a command directed evaluation. So if they have a soldier who they're concerned about their safety, like they're worried that they're going to harm themselves or someone else, or if there's a psychotic episode and the commander doesn't know what to do with this, they can command refer them for an assessment to determine if they're fit for duty. And so those are the situations where I would do my best to refer them to someone else. And I would do the evaluation, but if treatment was something that I thought was needed, I would refer them to one of our clinical providers, who that's really all that they do. But we do have options for the outside as well. So like being embedded in a unit, there's a bunch of dual relationships and, with all the different hats that we wear. And sometimes we get somebody who we work with pretty closely and they want treatment. And it's just I think it would be better if we referred you to someone on the outside. That way you can be completely comfortable that nothing's getting back to me or whatever. So, we do have those options. And then sometimes maybe we want treatment, maybe somebody in our shop wants to, and they're not going to, I wouldn't have felt comfortable going to anyone within our local network of, on Fort Benning, just because I consult with them on a regular basis and stuff. And so So yeah, that was definitely an option that we used on a pretty regular basis.
Having someone with your very kind of niche expertise consulting decision makers for who they should not necessarily maybe hire in the private sector, but within the scope of the military, who they should bring into these units. I would imagine that is a significant cost to the agency, to the organization, to be able to invest in somebody like you to be a part of that screening process. So when you think about the application in the private sector, like that concept transitioning over, can you talk about what the research supports of the ROI of doing it on the front end versus not doing it and just doing a background investigation or the traditional, kind of half measures, and kind of why it makes sense to go the extra mile?
I think the research is pretty clear that when organizations emphasize getting the right people in the organization, and actually I'll go back to, have you ever read the book Good to Great? You familiar with that?
Yep.
Yeah. Old book now, right? It's like 25 years old, but Jim Collins, management researcher, he went in and looked at organizations and he asked, what separates the great ones from the ones that are just kind of average, and found a whole bunch of things. But one of the things he found was that great organizations, they put an incredible emphasis on getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off, and the right people in the right seats. And so in terms of when you hire the wrong person, man, the cascade of costs that puts on the organization. I mean, you think about think about organizations you've been a part of where you've had an employee that was just a terrible hire. Think about the stress it caused on other people, the morale that it caused, the lack of engagement that people experience. I mean, there's a ton of costs that come with that. Whereas if you put an appropriate amount of emphasis on making sure these are the attributes we care about, this is a valid and reliable way to measure these attributes. And if you do your work on the back end to show that you're being more efficient with your hiring process, then you're going to have increased retention. You're going to have increased morale. You look at some of the research from Gallup, they found that 70% of what makes an employee engaged is explained by the manager. So the leadership skills of the manager can explain 70% of what makes their employees engaged. And an engaged employee, man, that's exactly what you want. You got somebody coming to work on time that's super excited about the job. They're asking for more work. They're wanting to grow. Disengaged employees, the stat that I remember, I'm probably gonna get it wrong, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyway. But I think for the disengaged employee, I think the number was it costs an organization, I think it was $3,500 for every $10,000 you pay them.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And you may want to fact check me on that, but that's the number that's standing out in my head. And you think about the disengaged worker, they're coming in late. And when they're late, the boss has to sit down with them and talk to them. The boss also has to prep what they're going to say before they sit down and talk to them. If they don't punish them, other employees the ones that are coming in on time are going to see that and be like, man, I guess it doesn't matter that I'm coming here on time. And so it's going to have this contagion on them that's going to start to pull their engagement down. So I was just going to throw out one more stats. I don't know if you guys are familiar with self-determination theory. So Ryan and DC are the two authors of that. And I did see a study that they were a part of where if leaders in an organization were autonomy supportive, so if they were really focused on allowing their employees the appropriate amount of autonomy, then there was a 3-to-1 return on investment in terms of training leaders to do that. And so I guess the way that ties in is that if you hire individuals that have great leadership skills and they have those attributes that Jim Collins talks about with leaders being humble and also having strong professional will, then I think the ability to force multiply, I think, is huge.
Yeah, no, that's great. The second part of the question was, do you have are there any consistent red flags from a personality profile perspective that you see where the applicant may present, like on the first pass they may present as like high speed, like very strong for the position they're seeking out, but then that type of profile when they get into the organization tends to be toxic or
Yeah.
high risk?
Yeah, I think the most dangerous employees are the ones that are able to do that well. They're able to kiss up and kick down really well, or manage up, however you want to say it. I've reached out to individuals in various organizations and asked them, give me an example of a failure, like a really bad hire. And in my mind, like I have people who are like failing drug tests, or people who are just completely crashing and burning, and but the answers that I keep getting are the people that come in and they're just completely toxic, and they flew under the radar, in terms of when they got hired, they looked great on paper, they presented well, they get into the organization and their focus is on themselves and shining to the boss, and what the individuals I spoke to said was these people just they leave this just wake of destruction in the form of like bad morale, poor retention. People don't want to work there, and it lasts for an extended period of time. And so, I think the personality trait that to answer your question more succinctly, I think is narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
I think narcissism is like one of the most toxic leadership traits that there is, and it's the most dangerous because their ability to be charming and their ability to charm the people that are above them. Meanwhile, they're just wreaking havoc on the organization, and the people beneath them. So yeah, that'd be my answer.
It's crazy, and I think it's a good nexus into what we wanted to talk about next. But I feel like in my experience, the people that I've worked with in the past that are clearly have some type of narcissistic personality tendency, or it's very clear, they outwardly, everyone who has worked with them in like a professional capacity but hasn't actually like seen under the hood, they have a sterling reputation and
Mm-hmm.
everyone thinks the highest of them. But the small group of people in that inner circle that actually know who this individual is, or these individuals, it is it couldn't be more of a 180 difference in what the outside thinks versus what we actually know. And when we get into the reason why we wanted to talk to you initially about this cognitive bias conversation, and people pretending to be something that they're not, or people having this inflated sense of confidence and being able to perform so convincingly, to those on the outside, is there a way to, like, how can you screen for that? How do those people get in those positions so often? It seems like.
Yeah, that's probably been our biggest challenge, really. Years ago at Ranger Regiment, um, we we have a selection event there that we do once a year, and it's selecting the field grade officers, so majors and up. And so these are individuals that are going to eventually be the leaders of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's a crazy sort of screen in process because you have like 30 infantry officers that come and assess, and they only pick 4 at the end of it. And like the top 10 could do the job fine, and so it's an embarrassment of riches. It is really, really exceptional human beings. And we put a lot into it. And I was catching wind of people complaining that we had some arrogant, like narcissistic field grades. And I remember being like, man, what in the world? Like we're like really putting a lot into this. And so I decided to send a survey out to the organization, and I asked, describe the best leader that you've ever had, the best field grade leader you've ever had. Describe the worst one you've ever had. And then did some quantitative kind of questions to help inform some of the tests that we were given. But really what jumped out was the top leader was somebody who was others focused. They were selfless. They were humble. And the worst one was, I mean, the Rangers, all over it. Like they were like fragile ego, afraid to bring bad news to the boss, spotlighter, and so that made me sort of think that, man, we really need to shift what we're looking at and try to figure out how to get after some of these narcissistic traits. And that caused me, I shifted over to a different test at the time. So are you guys familiar with the Hogan?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we implemented the Hogan. And the nice thing about the Hogan is that it has those derailers. So it has like a set of scales that it spits out that is negative traits that come out when you're under stress.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one change where we had like, there's like a bold scale in the Hogan that sort of gets after some narcissism. And so there was that piece. I think that it worked somewhat. I had an individual who came through and he presented really, really well. Our assessment of him was concerning because the indicators of narcissism were really high on testing. And then even in the interview, like there was some schmoozing, there was some stuff that's like, okay, like that we're sniffing something out here.
Mm-hmm.
And so he boarded great. And but our brief struck a nerve with a couple of board members, with one of the board members in particular. And he was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. This dude's awesome. And so they opted not to select him. They did not hire the individual. And afterwards, there was another person in the room, like more of an admin kind of person that runs the slides and stuff and kind of keeps the trains moving. He shot me a message on our little instant messenger thing on the computer. And he was like, every enlisted person and every person that works under this guy hates him. Like he has been the most toxic leader. And so for me, it was like, okay, like I think something's happening here in terms of our ability to sort of sniff that out. Long-winded way to say, like, that was one way that we have done it. But honestly, I think the best way to sniff out narcissism is peer evaluations. So another nice thing about being in a military assessment and selection kind of process is they're going through the same selection together. They have to rate and evaluate each other. And that to me has been like the most valuable tool, because when you have somebody who is like really, really focused on managing up and they forget about like their peers and they've got sharp elbows, it's going to come out in peer evals. And so that's usually my go-to. Like if I have a question about narcissism, I'm very much going to look at those peers and be like, all right, what are some of the comments? Is there anything that's consistent with this? And then also, is there anything disproving this? Because that's, one of the mitigators of being biased is you need to, like confirmation bias, like you need to look for disproving evidence as well. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of one case in particular where I had a guy on testing. He looked like, Jesus Christ, like he claimed uncommon virtues, that he never does anything bad. And so the test is saying, okay, this guy is really managing his impression. And he presented that way too. It felt like a car salesman kind of presentation. And then when I pulled up peers, I mean, they just obliterated him. They're like, this guy, spotlighter, all the traits that in the survey that folks said are the worst leader I've ever had. This is what they
checking
embody.
The boxes.
So,
yeah.
So I think, and it's hard. You can't really do peer evals in the civilian world. So that makes it a little bit difficult, but at least that's how we've gotten after it in the military.
Yeah, that's helpful. So like with the Hogan and other types of personality and performance assessments, do you find them to be pretty reliable indicators of identifying those pain points that you wouldn't be able to necessarily tease out in an interview?
I do. Yeah, I'm a big fan of psychometric testing, stuff that has demonstrated validity and reliability. Like I really like the NEO. And I'm a big fan of the 5-factor model of personality. So for your listeners who are not familiar, the 5 factors, you've got emotional stability, also known as neuroticism. So this is how anxious or angry or depressed somebody tends to be with their personality. You've got extroversion, which is in outgoingness, but also energy. You got openness, which is like openness to new experiences. You got agreeableness, which is how caring and cooperative they are. And then you got conscientiousness, which is their work ethic. And there's a good bit of research on 5-factor model and performance. Really what we like to see is high conscientiousness and low neuroticism. So somebody who has strong work ethic and then they're resilient, and the other stuff can vary. I mean, I've probably interpreted, I was going to say maybe 10,000 NEOs. It's been a lot over the years. And like, I'm still impressed with it. Like, I'm still like, I saw a guy, I supported an assessment selection last week, and I saw a guy who his openness was like 4 standard deviations above the norm. So, he exceeds the 99.9th percentile.
Oh,
and it was super clear. Like in the interview, when asked about his hobbies, he had like a page, of like things that he loves doing and all this. But the problem is that he was a good idea fairy. He just was, running after every idea, and like there was no practical, like there was nothing holding his feet to the ground. And so as a result, he was kind of burning his people out because they couldn't actually complete a project because he was just so focused on like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I have found them to be a very useful tool in the personnel selection sphere. And also like some of the tests we use, like there's validity scales, like they're helpful to show like this person is they're not being honest, or they're being really guarded, in the process. And then one of the things I really like doing is in the interview, like I'll pull up their testing, and I'll say, hey, on our personality test, it suggests that like you tend to be a bit disagreeable. You know yourself better than anybody in the world. So like, help me understand why the test would show me that.
I'm not disagreeable.
Yeah. No, I'm not. Yeah. But yeah, they and so like they go into it, pretty in detail. I'm never gonna just trust the test alone. Like I'm always gonna pair that with their self-report and then behavioral observations too. Like if I have any sort of behavioral examples through the process that can support the testing, if I've got all 3 of those, then I feel pretty confident that this is this person's trait. And then that's when I say this could show up this way in the workplace, or this is how it showed up in the past. And then I'm fortunate enough where I'm not the decision maker. Like I'm never the one that's saying he's hired or not. I'm just teeing up the information for the hiring authority, and then they can do with it what they will.
It's such a helpful consultation, I'm sure, to have in that process, especially because you're not taking like the results of an assessment or a test that this person's taking, and you're taking it as like the word of God and saying this is who this person is. You're using that as a kind of an information conduit to fuel your interview with the individual and to guide questions and to corroborate or move away from certain, conclusions that you may have drawn from that or what it could have meant. So it's just such a full scope way to understand an individual in a very short amount of time, and seems to be very effective. All right, that concludes part 1 of our conversation with Dr. Jeremy Noble. We ended up getting into a lot of different areas, so we split this episode into 2 parts. If you're interested in hearing more of this discussion, our second part focuses more on different aspects of cognitive bias, and we also get into some conversation around narcissism. So keep your eye out for part 2. Thanks again.